And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. This is our 77th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 405th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, May 24th, 2018. Jared has the week off, so I'm your host this week, Andy Bottoms. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. Banner moments are often hard to come by in the offseason, and this week was no exception until I received a note from Jared this morning about the issues facing former IU football coach Bill Mallory. Coach Mallory's son, Kurt, later shared the news on Twitter that he recently suffered a fall and had to undergo emergency brain surgery. Based on his response to the surgery, they've started hospice, which leads me to this somewhat unconventional and certainly non-basketball related banner moment. While I have a lot of great IU basketball related memories to look back on from my time growing up in Indiana, like the 1987 title, watching Calbert Cheney, trying to find ways to stay up to watch Big Monday or Super Tuesday games that started at 9 o'clock on a school night, and sometimes being woken up by my mom pounding on the coffee table and yelling at the TV anyway. Despite all that, some of my fondest IU sports memories came from the IU football team, and more specifically, those led by Coach Mallory. The first year my dad decided to get season tickets was actually Mallory's first season in Bloomington, and that was a season, as those who have followed the program know, that IU went 0-11. We enjoyed it so much, though, that we only got 2 tickets that first year, and so my dad would alternate between taking my mom and I. And I quickly made it clear that I didn't want to miss any games. So the next season we ordered 3, a number that wouldn't change until I went to school at IU, and it went down to 2. And then again, after I got married, when it went back up to 4. And so those games during the Mallory era were special times for us to spend together as a family, and they're memories that I cherish to this day. Got there early to tailgate. We met one of the most passionate and knowledgeable IU fans that I've ever come in contact with, whose name is Ray. May he rest in peace. And he would always be good for a good one-liner about how much he hated Kentucky fans or Ohio State fans. But I think my favorite was one when I came out and asked him about the game after it was over, and he greeted me with "We took care of William, but had a hell of a time with Mary after a game that was a little too close for comfort." So we saw some rough football over the years, but we also saw greatness in the form of guys like Anthony Thompson, Ernie Jones, Dave Schnell, and a number of others. And we saw Mallory eventually turn the program around and sat in the stands to watch IU beat Ohio State and Michigan. The Michigan game in particular is memorable because the weather was miserable, but 9-year-old me refused to leave. And to this day, I don't let my dad live it down that they haven't beaten Michigan since then. So, he'll thank me for making us sit there. We went to the Liberty Bowl and froze our rear ends off when they beat South Carolina. And all in all, so many memories of IU football during that era were kind of a banner moment for my childhood, if I want to really shoehorn the reference in there. And so, as many of you know, Jared's dad was an assistant coach during that time period. And earlier today, he shared a note that he got from Mark Deal, who coached under Mallory and today is the assistant athletic director for alumni relations. And as Mark mentioned in his note to former players, or the Mallory men, as they are so proudly called, he has helped all of us with so many things in the past. Now it is our turn to lift him up through our prayers for him. Toughness was certainly a hallmark of Mallory teams during that era, and I honestly can't remember a negative word ever being said about him, specifically the grace and emotion with which he handled his firing after having taken IU to football heights that few, if any, expected. And former QB Trent Green summed it up pretty well on Twitter today when he said, "He helped mold thousands of young men through the game of football. He's had a lasting impact on my life and countless others. Integrity, toughness, and hard work only begin to describe Bill Mallory." I'm sure the fondness I feel for Coach Mallory and the sadness I felt when hearing this news pales in comparison to the feelings of those who played and coached for him. And in some ways, I guess that's the magic of sports, where someone I've never met helped shape my love of IU and was a central figure in some of my best family memories. So in this difficult time for the Mallory family, I'd ask that all of you send your thoughts, prayers, positive vibes, whatever you believe in, to Bill and his family. He's a true Hoosier icon who will always hold a special place in my heart and my memories. And with that, I will introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, he is an assistant basketball coach at Western High School, the founder of the world-renowned Delphi Bracketology Club, the host of Talking Hoosier Baseball, who had and the IU baseball team had a big comeback win today in the Big Ten tournament, and more importantly, proud papa to a recent IU graduate. He is the coach, Brian Tonsoni. Coach, it's Tonsoni time. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me tonight. I just want to also say a shout out to Coach Mallory and his family. I am fortunate enough to, my brother-in-law is a Mallory man, played and graduated. His last senior year was 1993. We've been texting back and forth today a little bit. And that group is tight knit, and I've been able to fortunately witness that through my brother-in-law Ross Hales, who is a tight end at that time. So I grew into IU football at the same time you did, Andy. I was a little bit older. I was actually attending class when you were 9 and 10. And so those memories of all those games that you mentioned, the Michigan, Ohio State, are very fond memories for me, and the reason why I've been a season ticket holder ever since. So thoughts out to that family and to all the Mallory men. It was an outstanding time, and he was an outstanding coach, and we hoped for the best for his family and all of that. Basketball-wise, it's summer, and it is time to have all the news of the All-Star games, and then to see the athletes start reporting to the campus. Always an exciting time for fans from a coaching perspective, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. It's a time to be able to be with your team in a development stage and get the ball starting on what we all think is going to be an exciting year.
Absolutely. And to my left, he is our longest serving intern. He's a young man who serves fresh hot takes regularly on Twitter. He is studying sports media at Indiana University and is following up last summer's internship at the Big Ten Network with an internship at the Mothership in Bristol starting here in the next couple weeks. He is Michael Dugan. Michael, what's on your mind as we get rolling tonight?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And I want to follow up, Andy, on your banner moment. I never saw a Bill Mallory team play, but his impact on IU athletics and IU football is undeniable. So obviously sending my thoughts and my prayers and positive vibes to him and his family. But what stuck out to me today actually is something small, and I guess this sounds very millennial of me, but Indiana men's basketball Instagram account posted a graphic of Demezy Anderson, and the quote from Demezy said that this group, this team is going to be a brotherhood that's going to be unstoppable on and off the court. And it's a small sentence, and it doesn't mean much, in terms of what we can expect this year, X's and O's wise or record wise from this team. But to me, teams that can bring in chemistry onto the court from off the court usually fare well, and they're fun to watch when they can click, not only on the court, but also off the court. You can see that kind of blend together. And especially considering how good this incoming freshman class is and can be, I don't know. This meant a little more than just a one-sentence quote on the Indiana men's basketball Instagram page. And I looked at the top two comments on it, and they were from Robert Johnson and Freddie McSwain. So to see two outgoing seniors kind of respond to some incoming freshman's quote, and it kind of gave me, it showed a little bit of a bond, albeit a tiny bond, with the outgoing senior class and the incoming freshman class. So that's a tiny little something that stuck out to me, and it had me a little bit excited that this freshman class might be an extremely, extremely tight-knit group, considering all that talent. It's a promising feeling.
Yeah, it's certainly a good one for such a foundational class for what Archie Miller wants to do. So it's a good, albeit a short sentence, as you said, it's a good start, and I think should make people feel good about what those guys are going to be able to accomplish. So with that, here are the topics and questions we're going to address this week. So on Wednesday, some APR, the latest APR results were released. We're going to talk a little bit about that, not only how IU fared, but just a little bit more about how that score is calculated, because I know Brian and I, before we wanted to talk about this, tried to do some research, and he did the heavy lifting on finding a good resource for that. So we'll kind of talk people through that, because I know that's a question. I think the first question that responded to Jared's call for questions on Twitter was related to that. Quick thoughts on Romeo revealing what appears to be his jersey number. We'll get Michael's perspective as a student and Brian's as a coach. I think it's always fun as we get different people on, particularly in the offseason, to kind of go through and get thoughts on what is unique to them and the perspectives that they bring. So looking forward to doing that and hitting a few questions there. And then we also got a handful of questions on Twitter, so we'll try to make sure that we hit all those. So all of that coming here on Assembly Call Radio, and let's dive right in. So the first story that came up this week, so multi-year APR score came out on Wednesday, as I said. IU saw that fall for the third straight year. So Inside the Hall had a write-up on this, and basically the gist of it, the multi-year score released Wednesday of 943 reflects an average of Tom Crean's final 4 seasons in Bloomington and puts the program in just the 10th to 20th percentile nationally among all men's basketball programs. So again, there's a lag time in when these are reported. So keep in mind that it doesn't have anything to do with the guys who have recently graduated. They're not turning it around that fast. So this is all 4 years of this were the last 4 years for Tom Crean. And so the one note kind of where a cutoff would be, because that 943 in and of itself doesn't mean a great deal. To compete in the 2018-19 postseason, teams must achieve a 930 4-year APR. NCAA members chose the standard because that score predicts on average a 50% graduation rate for teams at that APR level. Additionally, teams must earn at least a 930 4-year APR to avoid penalties. So, Brian, since you look this up, I'm going to give you the first stab at explaining how the APR actually works in layman's terms, and then we'll see how far that gets us, and then we'll kind of go from there and get into more of the IU centric part. So, what was the kind of big takeaway from you in terms of how that worked?
Thanks a lot, because I'm not sure it's all that easy to share, but I did.
You're a teacher, so I just assumed that this would come more naturally to you than either of the rest of us. So I'm giving you first crack.
I'll try to do my first real quick 30-second lesson on the APR. But basically, there are 2 possible points for each scholarship. So in basketball, there's 13 scholarships. There's a possible each year of 26 is the way I gathered it. If you get 2 points if a player is retained for the spring semester and academically eligible. You get 1 point if a player is academically eligible but leaves the institution during the year at some point. You get 1 point if a player stays at the institution but is academically ineligible, and you get 0 points if a player leaves the institution and it is not academically ineligible. That is the rules per the NCAA.org website that Andy and I were looking at. I think there's still, for me, a lot of questions within that, especially with early exit NBA people who might be eligible. Is that a hit to the APR?
And actually, to that point, I did find something else on Twitter. So this is the person's is Michelle Hosick. I may or may not be saying that correctly, but it's at NCAA Michelle on Twitter. And it seemed like there had been some other questions. And so her response was, if a player leaves for pro sports opportunities, he or she has to be eligible to not adversely impact the team APR. If they transfer to another school, they have to have a 2.6 GPA to not hurt the team. Only players on the roster at the start of a term impact that term's APR. So I think the big questions people have are around the transfers and guys going and people going pro. So that was the best thing that I could find that at least attempted to shed some light on that piece of things. So for what it's worth, that appears to be how that works.
And so you accumulate points, and if you have 25 and one person is, let's say, academically ineligible on a basketball team, but stays with the program, you have 25 out of 26. There's a division and then multiplication to get your 3-digit number. And so that's the core of the APR. And so basically, in 4-year average needs to be 930. So in 4 years, if I did my math right, and Andy, you're more of a math guy than I am. I'm a social studies teacher, but I think you can have 7 or 8 points that count against you over that 4-year segment to be at 930. And that's where they get their 50%, I think, 7 of 13 scholarships. So, so that's the formula. Now, whether like a Curtis Jones, what his GPA was, I don't know. Does he count because it was mid-year, not the end of the year? Those are things that I still would probably want to answer. But I think it is that is part of the issue. Is we've had some people leave for transfer purposes, and what was their GPA and what was their standing at the time of transfer for the numbers being a little bit lower than what they were in Coach Crean's early times.
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of cut us off here. We're gonna take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about what that all kind of means from an IU perspective. Now that we at least have what we hope is a baseline level of understanding of how it works, we'll kind of talk about maybe what this means, if there's any reason for concern. Come back. We'll talk about that after the break. Stick with us. All right. That was 1442. I just figured before we got into the IU part, it would probably be worth breaking now. So I'll pop this in here. So 1442. All right. Welcome to everybody on on YouTube. We thought we were ready to start on time, and then I started recording before I actually started the Hangout. So one of these times when I host, we'll actually start promptly at 9. Although I don't really know that we start promptly at 9, even when Jared's in charge. So I might be giving him too much credit on that. I'm not sure. One of the questions though is funny. Somebody asked something about whatever the best part of the show was with him not being here. I can't really think of any good parts of it because it's a lot more pressure to not screw things up than I normally have. Usually just sit here and talk and not have to worry about anything. So I was confused a little bit too though, Brian, by I still think even what she wrote on there, I don't know, somewhat helpful, but yeah, that stuff is still odd. I mean, certainly feels like you're going to get penalized if guys, basically left school and weren't, didn't finish the semester in good standing because they went to go work out and do whatever.
Right. But, I think that's the biggest thing to look back on the guys that leave for the NBA. Do they finish that spring semester? And yeah. I imagine that would be, I didn't know, again, is it each semester? So there's 13 basketball scholarships. You have 26 in the fall, 26. So your yearly is 52 possible points. Or is it per year?
Yeah, I don't know. I wondered that too, because the example on the site that you had was football specific, which is
right
simple because it's only in one. I mean, obviously bowl games and stuff like that, but it's pretty much one semester. So I don't know. I was trying to do the math, and we can talk about this when we come back. I was trying to kind of do the math and back into it a little bit around, and it seemed like about 24 out of 26 gets you roughly to the score that they got last year, but it's not exact.
Right. It's not exact. So, then I
maybe it is
52.
Yeah.
And basketball, nonetheless, you have one guy transfer and not finish the semester, or one guy go pro and not finish the semester, and you're down in the 920s because you don't have as many scholarships as, football.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. All right, we'll hop back in and we'll kind of talk more about I'll kind of hit the IU specific parts. So, and the run sheet, and then we'll transition. Stuff here. Move a couple things around. I turned on. I assume, Brian, you watched some of the baseball game. I turned it on. It was 5-0. I saw him score the first run, and then I kind of went and did something else. And then I saw somebody on Twitter talk about the home run, and so then I watched and saw the end where they won. But
it was crazy. The whole time, and now that I'm doing a podcast, I'm like, you guys probably, when there's bad losses, I'm thinking, okay, how are we going to do a show when we had 3 hits in 2 games? Our segment called Hoosier Highlight, real quick.
Yeah.
Our award segment, real quick.
It was the hit that we got in whatever. Yeah.
So now we have something to talk about next week, at least, regardless.
Yeah, that's positive. That's good.
It's hard to hit a home run, and that's how IU scores. They hit home runs. But Gorski hit one, I think it was 10 rows up over the 375 mark. That just doesn't happen in that park.
I was gonna say, that park is like a cavern, isn't it?
Yeah, and they built it, and the prevailing winds blow in. So it's the same. I think it's the same dimensions as the old park, which was south of town in Omaha. But they built it in a different direction, and so the prevailing winds blow in. So it makes it play longer.
Huh. So convenient.
And I think it was built when the bats were crazy and the balls were crazy, and they've done a lot of that for player safety.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, all of that led to a very spacious park.
All right. I'll get us started here on the next segment, and we'll go from there. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni, and our student intern, Michael Dugan. One quick note, if you ever have to miss all or part of an episode of Assembly Call Radio, there are 2 great ways to catch up. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for Assembly Call. Or if you are a truly dedicated Hoosier and Assembly Call fan, you can watch our live broadcasts on Thursday nights and participate in the live chat on YouTube. You'll get all of the in-between segment banter that doesn't make it onto the radio or the podcast edit. So subscribe on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/assembly call. So we're talking a little bit about the APR numbers that came out, and we were talking a little bit off the air. It would have been, good in between segment banter, trying to do the math on this to really try to figure it out. So depending upon how you interpret some of the things that we talked about before, we weren't sure whether, do basketball, because it spans multiple semesters. Do you, is it instead of 26 points, is it 26 points that you're eligible for each semester? I don't think we know that. I think seems at least reasonable to assume that some of last year's issues were some combination of the early entrants that were there. Maybe that's not the case, but I think that's where people's minds would typically go. But again, it doesn't encompass this past season when you saw, Robert Johnson, Josh Newkirk, Freddie McSwain, Tim Priller, Colin Hartman graduate. So presumably those are good signs. Michael, from your perspective, these numbers give you any cause for concern, or is it, kind of puts a bow on the Crean era and everything moves forward? Really nothing to see here, nothing to worry about.
I think it's probably in the middle of those two ends. I think because of the beginning of the Crean era, how well this team performed in the APR aspect of it, to kind of rebound and see the second leg of his tenure at IU end like this, I wouldn't say it's concerning. I don't think that's the right word, but I would say it's a little, not even quite perplexing. I can't think of the perfect word for it, the word I'm trying to use here, but it's not exactly concerning, but it's more than just brush it off, nothing to see here. I think it's more toward nothing to see here. I don't think it's terribly significant. This team isn't in serious jeopardy of being in trouble, dipping below that 930 mark, but to see such a drastic drop over the tenure of Tom Crean as the team got more and more relevant nationally speaking, and really in the Big Ten, there's a little something there. But again, obviously he's not in Bloomington anymore, so I wouldn't say that there's much to worry about, Tom Crean related there, but I wouldn't go as far as to say it's concerning.
Brian, one of the things, this was, I think, a show, we talked about this some in the offseason last year. Maybe it was toward the end of the Crean era. And it was a little bit about, the question was essentially, what is the identity of the program under Tom Crean? And I think most of us who were on there, and it may just have been Ryan, Jared, and I at the time, one of the things we talked about, I think we talked player development and finding, some of those unheralded guys. But the other thing we talked about was the focus on academics, perhaps in contrast to the, Sampson era and all those kinds of things that were there. Does seeing these numbers go down over the latter part of his tenure make you view him any differently?
No, and I haven't made up my mind, Andy, yet how serious I want to take APR, because I have a lot of respect for Marnie Mooney and the job that she did as an academic advisor for the basketball team. So I believe academics under Coach Crean were very much emphasized. I think it has to do more with the transfer part of it. And it maybe has to do with getting some players in who either transferred and then didn't finish strong for a semester, or maybe left early for the NBA and didn't finish. And while there's several things that in that era that bother me, academics was not one of them. And someone in the chat said that they believe Kentucky had real high APR scores and they're sending people to the pros all the time. And that's probably that pro exception. I think as an educator, I'm not a big number guy, whether it's a test score or all this stuff that's in education right now. And I applaud the APR for making sure that we hold schools accountable for having kids get an education. But I think looking at that by itself is just a part of the whole process. So no, I will always appreciate Coach Crean and Marnie Mooney for their academic efforts. And I don't think the APR reflects their concern.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair, and hopefully the way I asked that question didn't make it seem like that I did, but I thought it was worth discussing.
No, I wasn't,
just because of that.
I wasn't saying that, but APR is always thought of as your emphasis on academics, and obviously, I think Crean and his staff wanted kids to go to class. I think that's very, very obvious.
Yep, totally agree. Well, the other bit of news that came out about IU this week was I think Romeo Langford posted this on Instagram. Basically, a picture of him in an IU jersey wearing number 0 with the hashtag Agent Zero with it. So doesn't feel like a huge leap to suggest that means he's going to wear 0 at IU. I guess, Al Durham has number 1, which is what he wore in high school. So that I guess is where he did that, and maybe just wanting to go with something different. Brief history of who wore that number, most notably in recent years at least. So Will Sheehy wore it for 2 of his 4 years at IU, in 2013 and 2014, where he averaged first year 9.5 points a game, 3.5 rebounds. The second year, his senior season, 11.4 points per game and 4 rebounds. Max Bielfeldt wore it in 2016 when he was there, when he shot 45% from 3 and scored 8 points a game. I think those are the 2 we did. I think it was last offseason, maybe the offseason before. We kind of started going through number by number who the best IU player was to wear it. So I think the debate we had was between those 2, and I think we were split, as I recall. And then Curtis Jones, up to the middle of last season, wore that most recently. And he obviously transferred, opened up that number, and so it looks like that's what Romeo will wear. I don't really know that there's any kind of meaningful question to be asked here, but Michael, anything surprise you about that? Anything that make you any more excited about the Romeo Langford era, that he'll be wearing the number 0, as I'm sure you'll find many of those at bookstores around campus come fall?
Oh, I'm
maybe
sure
now.
Yeah, maybe now. I'll put a little bit of thought into this one. I think that, having a guy like Romeo, he's got all of the marketability from an IU standpoint that you could possibly have. He's born and raised a Hoosier, coming to IU, obviously, and nationally relevant talent and a likely bright future in the NBA. So he's got all the marketability there. But, I think that this kind of adds a little bit to it. It kind of makes him a little more attractive to fans, especially the younger audience. And when I saw that, I thought initially of a guy playing baseball in New York by the name of Aaron Judge. You look at him, he plays for the Yankees. He's 9.5 feet tall. He hits home runs literally out of Yankee Stadium. He's got everything that you could possibly have as an athlete in that city to be considered marketable. And on top of it, he's number 99. It's nothing significant, but it's just a little something extra that kind of adds to it. And I think Romeo kind of has everything there is to have, athletically speaking, and, being from the state, obviously, in terms of marketability there. And adding number 0, it's a little bit of a unique thing for him, or just for a basketball player. And he's got a pretty good nickname, Agent Zero, R-O, obviously the first 2 letters of his name. So I don't know. It's not terribly significant, obviously, in the grand scheme of things. But in terms of marketability and potential attraction from younger audiences, I think it adds a little something to it.
Because I want to be completely transparent, I did not pick up on the row in the end of that until you just mentioned. Just so everybody knows, I'm that slow. Brian, any lingering thoughts for you on Romeo's jersey number, or are you ready to move on to something else?
No, wasn't it was it in 2013 at Mackey when he flexed after scoring? Was he wearing 0 at the time?
I think so, but I don't know for sure. I'm sure somebody can confirm that for us.
I'm sitting here visualizing Romeo going off at Mackey and having a part 2 of the bicep flex with the cheer block in the back.
I like it.
That picture is iconic for us Hoosier fans, especially for us Hoosier fans that live up here by Purdue. So that's what I'm thinking about with 0.
All right. I like it. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms, filling in this week for Jared Morris, and I'm here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni, and our student intern, Michael Dugan. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, there were a couple things that I wanted to get Michael's take on because as the one of us who, although not right now, but over the course of the season was actually in Bloomington and had probably a better pulse on things than we did. There was a couple of things I wanted to get his perspective on while we had the opportunity to have him on. So the first was, a lot of back and forth with people about students not showing up for tickets, not using their tickets, not showing up at games. I don't want to rehash what happened last year, although if that your thoughts on that provide context to your answer to this question, that's fine. But with Romeo coming with this recruiting class, do you see that changing, or do you think there's just something kind of fundamental about the interest in the program, or the makeup of the student body, or whether people are just more comfortable watching games at home or on the computer or things like that? Do you think that changes this year? How much of a bump do you think that really provides?
That's a good question. I think first and foremost, home losses to Fort Wayne and Indiana State, I think, aren't going to help the Hoosiers in this situation, or losses of that caliber. So I think that, and all joking aside, I think that seriously put a damper on student interest levels last season, especially because they didn't really come up with a huge win down the stretch. Maybe that Notre Dame game, but that was the first Saturday of winter break. So most students, in the middle of the afternoon, most students probably weren't paying attention to that, although they probably should have, because that was a great game. But no, I think the excitement surrounding Romeo's commitment on the 30th back in April, the attention that received from students. I tweeted out, that was the first day of finals week, and walking around campus, just passing by people having conversations, a lot of people were talking about him. I heard the name Romeo, and I heard Romeo Day a handful of times. So I think that there was a genuine buzz surrounding his commitment. And I think that if this team can get off to a hot start early in the season, we look at, games like Illinois last year. Granted, that was at like 9 o'clock on a Wednesday on Valentine's Day. So understandable that not a ton of students show up, but that was terrible. I think those games are going to be in the past. And I don't think that there will be a Duke, Michigan State type of crowd that there were for those games last year every night. But I think that the Romeo commitment, especially that week on campus, had a serious jolt in energy of the student body. And I would fully expect the attendance, pending a couple more unforgivable home losses early in the season next year, I'd expect it to jump drastically.
All right. So the other thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, obviously the recruiting class for Romeo is the headliner. People are excited about getting Indiana guys, but from a student's perspective, and particularly one like yourself, who certainly you're from the Chicago area, so not far away from Indiana, but at a school that certainly has a lot of out-of-state people. Does the notion of getting quote unquote Indiana guys really matter to student fans at this point, or is that kind of overblown?
I think that depends on who you ask. And I think, you're right. And on one hand, there are a lot of kids that go to IU that are from out of state. But on the other hand, most of the people that go to IU are still from Indiana. So I think at least that demographic of basketball fans certainly care. And I think that it's great news for them. And I think when you talk about the out of state kids, myself included, I think it's great. And I don't have the same feel, and my finger is not on the pulse as well as it is of those who grew up in Indianapolis and people from the state that went to IU or go to IU. I don't quite understand it much like they do for obvious reasons. I'm not from the state, but to me and to thousands of other students, I think it matters. And I don't know. I feel like most people don't really understand. I don't want to go down that road actually. But I feel like it matters a lot to a handful of people and to enough people that go to IU, because again, there are a lot of people that go to IU from the state of Indiana that really appreciate how much this means for the program. You don't need me to elaborate on that. We've talked about that for a couple months now, but I think it does matter to the majority of students. So I think that's going to have a pretty big impact.
Brian, what are your thoughts on that? I know we've had some conversations on here about, the notion of getting Indiana guys and what that really means, but where do you place the importance on that? What angle do you come at that from?
I think it might help just a little bit, but I think getting good guys will get the students back in the section more than anything. And I think Michael was just right. Everyone who is a Hoosier fan is just really excited about Romeo. I'm already thinking about how I'm going to snag tickets next year, because the price on StubHub is going to go up for even some of the marginal games. So I think it helps. I think the students, it's just winning, and the consistent winning will make that a top ticket again, instead of up and down. And even in the years we won, as we've talked over and over, that we had a rough start, then won the Big Ten. And I think you have a couple losses like we did last year and no one really big on the roster. So I think winning and good guys will get students back in, and it'll be loud and rocking in assembly.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think is people certainly take pride in the, having IU guys in there, what a basketball hotbed IU is. But I think if we go back to prior shows, I've always said, I don't think anybody would not come in to watch a really good basketball team if nobody on the roster was from Indiana. So it's something that I think is good to talk about. But ultimately, I think, as you said, getting good guys is more important. So when we come back, we're going to hit a couple topics I want to get Brian's perspective as a coach on. So we'll hit those and we'll start to dive into some of your questions. So we'll do that after the break. Stick with us here on Assembly Call Radio. Oh, managed to hold that cough in.
I think sports attendance at any point anymore is so dependent on winning more than it's ever been in the past because of all the other options. I'm sitting here watching 2 college baseball games on 2 TVs while I'm talking to you. There's all kinds of other things to do, but if you're winning, then that's the place to be. If you're not winning consistently, then there's easy, convenient ways to find studying. And although I never studied versus going to a game in my career, but I still don't. But people have changed. I would imagine, Michael, you're a diehard sports guy following your work and as knowledgeable as you are. There's very few of us that, I can't wait to get home at 3:15 to see what sports are on after school, but there's a lot of different interests out there. But if you win, people will want to go that maybe don't normally go.
Yeah. And I think the generation of people, obviously myself included, that are in college right now, we just have very short attention spans. So, if the team loses 3 in a row to Rutgers, Nebraska, and Illinois or Maryland, I think people are going to be like, oh, well, we're terrible, and then we'll win 3 in a row, and they'll be like, oh, we could win the Big Ten. I mean, obviously not that extreme, but people, you get 2-3 losses in a row that aren't so glamorous, and people they tune out like that. And then it takes a couple of wins to tune back in. But the issue was this year there weren't a lot of great wins to, write home about. So I think that plays a part of it.
Yeah, you see it in high school. When we play our rivals, our student section is packed. When we're playing somebody that's not, that interesting on a Saturday night, we don't have as many, and we're in a rebuilding stage. We start winning, then they'll start showing up for those Saturday secondary games. So I think that trend is a society thing more than an Indiana University thing.
I would agree with that. Totally.
All right. All right. I will start us off. So, Brian, I'll go to you first. We'll hit these off-season work. All right. Let me save this audio file first before I mess that up somehow. All right, I'm going to start here in a second. You are listening to the Assembly Call. Go to assemblycall.com right now to learn how to subscribe to our email newsletter, or you can simply text IU to 66866. If you want to get more out of being an IU basketball fan, then you need to be on our newsletter list. You'll get our weekly 6-banner Sunday news roundups, as well as our post-game analysis emails once the season begins. It's all free and will make you a smarter IU basketball fan. So go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866. I'm Andy Bottoms, filling in this week for Jared Morris, and I'm here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni, and our student intern, Michael Dugan. So whenever we have Brian on, I always like to try to get his coach's perspective on something, and so he actually tossed something out as we were talking about ideas for the show, and that was really the off-season work and kind of what time coaches get and how they can and maybe should allocate it. So again, Brian was heavily involved in the research department this week. So he reached out and found out about in the offseason, coaches get 8 hours total per week, 4 hours on court, 4 hours in the weight room. And the on court hours can be divided any way programs would like between team in individual. So Brian, first question for you related to that. What does that extra time really allow for? Or maybe how would you use it if you were in Archie's shoes is maybe the better way to ask the question.
And, there's still some things that I would want to ask of some people that I know in the coaching profession, like do individual workouts, groups of 2 or 3. In the past, I think they can have 2 or 3 in groups, but they are allowed now to have the team, I believe. And so how do you divide those 4 hours on the court? What is the division between teamwork, team practice versus your individual work? And there's 2 thoughts. One, you need better players. I wish I could remember right now. This isn't my saying, so I could give accurate credit. But do you want better, a better team with better players at the end of the season, not just better plays? So you got to balance the team aspect with, guys need to be able to dribble and need to be able to shoot, and they're only going to do that with good, hard individual work. So I would not go all 4 hours putting in offense and defense. In talking to some of the people at a couple universities, what I found out is they're probably going to split the 4 hours. Half of it will be a team on the court, and the other half will be individual workouts split up in probably half hours. A good workout, 30 minutes, if you go hard, you can get a lot of skill development in 30 minutes. And so I think you'll see coaches go either 30 or 45 minutes in their individual workouts. And then the extra time on the court, I think, does benefit putting in your offense and your defense. So that's how I would do it. I would probably do 2 1-hour team sessions and then split up the remaining 2 hours into individual groupings. And then I would, let the weight coach do what he wants to do in the weight room.
Yeah, I want to ask this question to both of you. Mike, I'll let you take this one first. But, with such a young team, a team made up of a lot of newcomers, how do you think the makeup of this year's team might influence how Archie allots that time this offseason, maybe different than what he would have done last offseason?
I think the fact that there are a lot of newcomers coming in, that definitely makes it a lot more difficult for Archie for a number of reasons, especially when you consider that some of these guys, and I won't name names because, at the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure, but I can infer some of these guys are further along the path of getting significant playing time than others. So some guys may need more individual development than others. I would feel like Romeo is pretty darn close to a plug and play guy, or as close as it gets for an incoming freshman. Compared to maybe other guys that need a little bit of individual work in terms of shooting, dribbling, passing, coach, like you said. So I think that this makes it difficult for Archie and his staff in the sense that not everyone is on the same page. And you look at last year, they still had a relatively, moderately large incoming recruiting class, and a couple of those guys played throughout the season. But, you got a lot of guys that, and even Deron Davis didn't play much last season. He's coming off a pretty bad injury. So you got a lot of guys that aren't all on the same page. And especially when a lot of them are freshmen, it's pretty tough to, maybe get them all in sync throughout the summer. So, once you have everybody on the same page going into the season, I think you can start to address the offense and the defense and focus on that more. But right now, some of these freshmen are further behind and further ahead, than their fellow classmates. So I think that's going to make it a lot more difficult than last season.
Yeah, Brian, how do you think that changes the way he might allocate the balance of time between individual and team work?
I agree with what Michael said, that you have different people at different levels, but one of the things that will help offset that, Michael, is the fact that you have veterans who already know the terminology, know the drills, and the veterans, even in non-team allotted time, if they're in working on their own, the veterans can help, especially once Jawan gets back on campus and some of those things. They can help speed that up for a variety of things. But where Michael's absolutely right is you have a unique talent coming in. And so how do you prepare the team for that? You're going to run Archie Miller's offense and everything like that. But when you have a special person like that, you want to start getting that going. I think it helps more defensively because you have an extra hour if you want to go the split way to be working on the pack line. But I do think this year's team is if you think Romeo's only for 1 year, you want to be as successful as possible in that year. So the time is sped up too. That's where I agree with Michael as well. You want to speed up and win while you have him here. And in order to do that, you got to get that defense going the way you want to as much as possible. And you have a lot of incoming guys that you're going to rely on. So that extra time on the court with your team, I think, can help in that way.
So if you could ask Archie a question at the end of the off season, and you said, all right, if you could only accomplish one thing in the off season, what do you think he would say? Brian, I'll throw that one to you first.
Shooting. They've got to be able to knock down shots. And I think he did that by getting a signed national letter of intent, and maybe not knock down deadly three all the time, but a scorer. So that was accomplished without a whole lot of work, but you're better off as a team if you get multiple players who are threats to score. And that comes with your ball handling, your passing, your understanding the offense, and doing those things. I've always thought, and I don't know if this plays in the college game, but I always thought summers were for offensive development, team and player. And then when we come in the fall, we're going to work heavy on defense. And that's not like you never worked on defense in the summer, but it was a time to get people to work on their offensive games. And I probably would lean that way. Again, at the high school level, I don't know, maybe change this year because of the makeup of the team, and you can teach that pack line stuff to kids who might not have played that. You might do a little bit more of that.
Michael, what about you? What's the one thing that you think he'd say?
I hate
that he
to
would be content with only getting better at one thing. To be clear, but
of course not. We know that one. I don't know. I hate to agree with Coach here because that doesn't make for great listening. But I think shooting, with how many close games this team lost last year, and to just mix that with their ability or inability to knock down the three, I think it would be. I think it'd be far-fetched to think that he wouldn't want his team's ability to shoot the long ball to improve drastically this offseason. And obviously that's something that, you can't just you can only get so good knocking down open threes, then throw yourself in a game, it gets a lot more difficult. But I think if this team can improve their shooting, maybe a couple of those close losses last year go the other way. So I think that, that kind of stalled a couple of runs too, that kind of probably rubbed Archie the wrong way. So I hate to agree with you, but I think it's shooting.
Well, and then Fitzner coming in too. So there's been a couple of recruiting. We recruited a great scorer, and Fitzner, who can shoot, 40% in whatever role that he's going to have next year. So I think Michael were right, because Archie got some points coming in just by recruiting. But I think you can develop that offensive type of activity and skill a lot in the summer.
I think from a defensive perspective, what'll be interesting is, and it's a little bit odd way to test it, but so much was made of the ramp up time to learn the pack line and all those things last year. So this was kind of the first year where you now have a chance where there's some people that have been ingrained in the system that can start to pass that along to guys. And how quick does that transfer process go? Now, the hard part about doing that is you also now have, 5 new players that haven't done it before. And the number of, you also lost 5 seniors. So the amount of veterans that you have to teach that to the younger guys is probably less than it'll be in a number of seasons, but it'll be an interesting first test of, and maybe he'll give some insight into this when he gives the talk at Huber's here in about a week. But it'll be interesting to kind of talk about how much time they spend on that, maybe in comparison to last year, if nothing else, just because everybody said last year, well, it has to be so much defense. It's a totally new system. It's all those kinds of things. And to a certain extent, that was blamed in some ways for the offensive struggles, that there wasn't enough time to spend on that. So maybe we're all right. And the fact that there's less time to be spent installing defensive concepts that at least some of the team knows now, as opposed to 0% of the team knowing a year ago, will help to be able to spend a little bit more time on the things like shooting, free throw shooting, and all that is a lot of repetition and things like that, but are, at the end of the day, hopefully going to win you some basketball games.
I'm just glad that the NCAA has allowed more hours for the coaches to work in knowing and watching Archie, and then some of the guys that I know that work. These guys really like coaching, and they like their players, and they want their players to get better. And you got to protect from, too much time. I know there are coaches out there that demand a lot, and so there has to be some obvious protections from that. But 4 hours a week at the college level, where these guys are, have a chance to go professional and do some things, and it's high level basketball. That's a move that I think I can clap on the NCAA. And they really didn't add more. It used to be 6 in the weight room and 2 on the court, so they just kind of reshuffled that. I think that's a good move, and I haven't been happy with the NCAA for some time, but I will give them credit.
All right, you're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Coach Brian Tonsoni and our student intern Michael Dugan. And before we get into your Twitter questions, I'm actually stealing a question from the Mind Your Banners podcast, but I thought it was an interesting one. Some of these hypothetical things in the offseason are good. So they sent a question about picking a player from this one player from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and then the current decade to make a starting 5. So their parameters were that you needed to end up with some kind of, you couldn't end up with 5 guards. You needed to end up with some kind of usable lineup. So where they landed on, as best I could tell, and they kind of went back and forth between Zach and Chronic Hoosier, George McGinnis, Isaiah Thomas, Calbert Chaney, Eric Gordon, and then they were kind of split from this decade on Cody Zeller and Oladipo. So we don't have a ton of time left in this segment, but did want to throw it out because I thought it was a good discussion point. So, Brian, what tweaks would you make to the lineup that they came up with? I know I listed some options in our rundown, which I won't kind of read off for everybody, but any swaps that you'd make within the lineup that they came up with?
I'd probably swap them all out because I like all these guys, but the 70s are tough to pick. But I would swap Buckner for McGinnis because Buckner is my all-time favorite Hoosier, just from a captain standpoint, a leader. And that's when I was growing up in middle school and watching them win in 76. And then you got to readjust all the others, because then I'd love to take Isaiah too, but if I have Buckner at point guard, I'm not going to take Isaiah. So I'm probably going to take Woodson because we need shooting. And then you got to go with Chaney for scoring. So now you got 3, and then you got to go big. And so I'm thinking Jeffries and Cody, but how do you not pick Vic? So I probably would go with Jeffries as kind of a smaller post, and then play Vic, Chaney, Woodson, and Buckner. But that speaks my age a little bit, where I'm a little bit biased to Woodson and Buckner. So that's I would swap them probably all out.
There you go. I like it. Michael, what about you?
I like that starting 5 that Brian just rattled off. I don't know. I was pretty sold in terms of agreement on the one that you read, Andy, but I don't know. I'm having to rethink this. It's tough to leave out Oladipo, but you got Zeller and Jeffries that you could throw down low. I mean, that's a tandem down low that I think would be pretty tough to mess with if you're any opposing team ever. So, Coach, I may have to go and agree with you there. But this is tough. I could look at this 50 times and change my mind all 50 times at this. So whatever I say right now is probably going to change in 10 minutes anyway.
How about Scotty May?
I know. See, that was what I thought. Could you play May as like a small ball 4, and then just because he was a big enough guy that I think he could do that. Yeah, what's funny is what Brian said. It's the domino effect of what you do, because if you look at the 80s era, like the names I have on here are all guards. So I had Isaiah, Woodson. I don't really know if there were rules around guys who played in multiple decades. But I had Isaiah, Woodson, Alford, and Jay Edwards as kind of the guys that you might really go with there. So you're kind of locked into a guard there. In my head, you're pretty much locked into Calbert Chaney in the 90s. And so then you kind of work around what you've got left there. But yeah, I thought the May and Buckner were the other 2 that I probably would have considered most from the 70s. And then, but yeah, what you do there goes a long way. But I think, hard to go wrong, but a fun hypothetical for sure as you go through it. So appreciate being able to steal that question. It was
we had to go Chaney because Jared would not let us be on the show if we don't pick his favorite player.
Yeah, that would have been tough. If you went Greg Graham, there would have been a chance, but but I don't think he would have been on board with that.
And there's Bailey on there too. There a lot of pressure, but I appreciate Jared allowing me to be on here, so I had to go with Chaney.
All right. Well, we're going to hit some more of your questions on Twitter here as we wrap up the show. So we'll do that when we come back from the break. You're listening to Assembly Call Radio. Stick with us. All right. 15:38.
David Kirk on the chat said it'd be great to have a first and a second team. As much as we all like IU, probably first, second, and third team.
Yeah. Yeah. The 80s was interesting though. It was hard to find like kind of obvious big guys to throw in. Not that there weren't, good big guys, but let's see.
I'd have loved to seen Woodson with the 3-point shot.
Andy, how much time do we have left on this final segment? I may need to go run and grab my charger for the laptop.
I don't think we have much. I'm doing math now, so if there's smoke coming out of my ears, that's why. I think not very much. So that's 42 and 38 is 80. 114, 54. Yeah, so we've got 45, 54. Shows 52 minutes, 6 minutes and 6 seconds minus 30. So we got about 6 minutes and 6 seconds left in total, but I got to leave 36 seconds for the outro. So we really need to start at 5:30. So you want to go grab it, you're more than welcome to.
I should be set.
Are you good on that? All right. All right. So let's look through these questions, see which ones we want to hit. I'll do we can do the East Coast Hoosier ones. The question from Daryl on recruiting, I feel like I do not have enough insight on, so I don't know if anybody else does. But Brian, you know anything about those other IU guys? That he talks about Trey Mann cut his list of 3. IU's not on it. Well, IU start paying more attention to Brandon Newman and the Franklin kid from Indiana.
I know a little bit about Newman, but not enough.
Okay. All right. We'll punt on that one for now. Missing one of our bigs in their mock lineups for next season. Wondering if you don't play small ball occasionally. I think that's an interesting question. Assume the following starters for next year. Big Ten starters. Yeah, that question from Craig might be a little hard to do. Might need a little more time for that one, but maybe we can hit a couple positions. So I'm going to take that.
That would be one to save.
Yeah,
like Craig's. That would be a episode or a segment. I think that you could.
Okay.
Once we know everyone's back, and you have you 3 original guys back, I think that Craig's question would be fantastic for a segment.
All right, maybe I'll tease that one. So fill some other stuff in here in case we need to fill time. Have a decent amount of stuff because the deadline will have passed to withdraw from the draft, which would potential things for Juwan, and then that's also when the Hewers Winery thing is. So just see if we can hang on every word that Archie has and go from there. So, all right, so we'll hit. Make sure there's no other questions that popped in here while I was copying these others in here. All right. I think that's good. So yeah, I'll kind of keep you guys posted in the chat on the time with these, but probably got some, since we only got a couple that we're going to hit, probably don't have to be super succinct. Let's save that guy. Hello, and welcome back to the Assembly Call. This is Andy Bottoms filling in this week for Jared Morris, and I'm here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni, and our student intern, Michael Dugan. And this is the part of the show we wanted to hit some Twitter questions. We stole a question from our friends over at Mind Your Banners to close out the last segment, and we talked about we probably need to do a maybe second and or third team in that for additional purposes that we could pit the teams against one another and see what happens. But maybe we'll do that in another episode. It's a long off season, so we'll see what we can hit. So the first question comes from East Coast Hoosier that says, "What is the best part of doing an episode without Jared?" I honestly don't know, because from my perspective, it's a lot more work for me to make sure that I don't screw anything up and record things and not have all the fancy soundboard and stuff like that. So for me, I feel like I'm letting everyone down. So no part of it for me is easy. Perhaps for Brian and Michael, it would be the fact that he's not here that frees up a seat for them to get on. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that might be it. East Coast Hoosier did have a serious question though that said, "What would be your ideal three-man class for next season?" That assumes that Romeo leaves as well. So, Brian, I'll toss that one to you first. What's your ideal three-man recruiting class of guys that are on the radar for next season?
Yeah, really quickly, the thing about Jared not being here is not worrying about what song or clip he's going to play that he has snuck in from his new soundboard. But I'd like to see probably two bigs and a guard. And from, if that's right, what would be your three-man recruiting class for next year? And I know we're really hot on the three bigs. So I don't know. And you always might have a situation where there's another scholarship open up, but Watford is interesting. I would take whatever first two bigs wanted to commit, and then I would focus on getting a guard, because if Romeo leaves, you're going to need an extra guard. So without naming names, that's the makeup probably that I would go. And any of those 4 or 5, we're looking at 2 guards and 3 post players. Take any of them in that kind of combination.
All right, Michael, what about you?
I agree completely. I think it starts with Watford. I think that's a pretty tough name to ignore in terms of next year's recruiting class for obvious reasons. A couple of obvious reasons, actually. I think it starts with him, and then maybe Jackson Davis up in Greenwood. So, I think that those 2 big men are not essential, but they would definitely help this recruiting class. And then obviously if what's expected occurs and Romeo leaves after 1 year, obviously you're going to need a guard to replace him. And Coach, like you said, there are a plethora of guards out there that are fully capable of contributing pretty early if they were to commit and come to Bloomington in 2 years. So I think it has to start with Watford and then a trickle down from there. But they also have to address a likely vacant guard spot.
And Brooks might be able to play guard. I know teams are trying to sell him on being a 2 guard. So Brooks might end up being the guard, even though I'm classifying him as a big.
Yeah, I think that's a
big 2 guard.
Yeah, that's kind of a tipping point for those guys for me, because I've heard some of that too, that people are trying to sell him on that. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say, maybe 2 of those 3. I think DJ Carton is a name that keeps coming up as a potential another guard. I do think one of the things we talked about this year, everybody's excited about Romeo in the backcourt and Finney. But there's not a ton of true guard depth on this year's roster as well. And knowing that you're likely to lose Romeo certainly doesn't make that any easier. All right. So next question is from Chris. Everyone is mentioning having one of our bigs in their mock lineups for next season. I'm wondering if we don't play small ball occasionally. The lineup he threw out was Devontae, Al Durham, Romeo, Justin Smith, and Juwan. Brian, I'll toss this one to you. We've got a minute or so left. Do you see Archie experimenting with some of those small ball lineups, particularly if Duran is still struggling to come back from injury?
Yeah, I do. I think that we played. I just think 3 guards is a way that college basketball is going some ways. But again, with all of the size, and you could play positionless basketball, I don't know that we're going to say 3 guards versus this, but I think that was successful during our run and kept us competitive against tough teams last year. So I think that we're heading more towards the 4 and 5 that can be a rim runner and a pick and pop shooter more so than a traditional post. I think that's the way he's headed. So yeah, I can see a small ball being part of it.
I think the interesting thing about a lineup like that, and maybe not even that one, but the idea of playing small ball is that IU has so many guys in that kind of 6-7 range now. So maybe it's not Al that's the the other guy on the floor. Maybe it's a Jerome Hunter or somebody like that, because I think you do have some options in that regard. A couple other quick things that we'll look to hit on next week. May 30th is a big date for a couple of reasons. It's when Archie talks at Huber's Winery, and it's also the deadline to withdraw from the draft. So people will certainly be watching what Juwan does there. But that is going to do it for us this week on the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, Join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com/join or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We'll be back again to talk IU hoops with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. All right. 6:09. I think we're good.
Michael, before I forget, thanks for sending me some of that info on soccer. I have one of my former bracketology guys who's a freshman this year, and another freshman at Indiana State that's a friend of my son's that are going to join me. They're big soccer people, and I needed to get up to speed. So I appreciate you getting back with me on that.
Yeah, of course. No, I'm not entirely well-versed in the World Cup, but I gave you what I could. That's about all I got, though. So
you made me read about Egypt. And
yeah, I think it could be interesting. It could be interesting. You never know.
Brian, you still don't have enough sports. You're doing. What are you doing with the World Cup? I think I saw you posted something about it on Twitter, but I didn't.
Once the baseball podcast is done, I want to continue the sports talk with Tonsoni and see if I can't develop that a little bit. And so I got some people that I talk basketball with, bracketology with, that we're going to do professional baseball, but any sport. We'll talk about it and see if I can't start developing that a little bit. And I like soccer. So we're going to do a World Cup preview with a bunch of guys from Indiana, which is probably, I don't know how good it's going to be.
No, I'm sure it'll be great. No, we're supposedly next week. They're announcing here in Cincinnati that they're awarding the MLS team here. So we'll see how it goes. They've been talking about it for a while, so I think everybody's kind of holding their breath, but everything lately seems pretty good. The city's just been kind of stumbling over itself trying to figure out where they're going to actually have the stadium and stuff like that. But when they can pretty much outdraw the Reds on virtually any non-Cubs weekend for an FC Cincinnati game, then that's a pretty good sign. So, all right. Well, I appreciate you guys hopping in for Jared and Ryan, and I'm sure we'll be having you guys on. Michael, good luck as you head up to ESPN, and
yeah, thank you.
Keep us posted on what's going on. And
absolutely,
I'm sure you get a lot of good ins with Dakich up there. You know, although he's not going to be up there in the summer, so that's disappointing. We'll have to figure something out about that.
I ran into him during the school year, and I messaged Jared, and he got back to me after Dakich left, and he said, "Tell him you're with Assembly Call, or tell him you know Ryan, or something like that." And I'm really upset I didn't get the drop of that because I'm still anticipating his reaction because I know there's some backstory there.
Yeah. I don't know. Who knows? We've been a target occasionally.
Andy,
but
somehow I lost your sound, so I'm going to sign off.
Oh, okay. I hung up the Skype call, so that might be it.
Something I hit here. I can hear Michael, but I can't hear you.
Oh, I don't know. All right. Well.
Oh yeah, I completely lost you guys too.
Oh, I think it was because I hung up Skype. Anyway, all right. Well, we'll wrap it up. That's a good sign as any to wrap it up. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll be back next week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Andy.